I shouldn't be telling you this, child, but tonight the rain sounds too much like memory. And memory, my dear, is something you can't ever silence once it starts to talk. You asked me once why I sit by the window every evening when the sun sinks behind those dying cornfields, staring out as if I'm waiting for someone who stopped existing years ago. Maybe it's because I am. Or maybe it's because promises, the kind whispered by sons to their mothers, don't die even when the world begs them to. My son promised forever. I paid the interest. I close my eyes and still see the afternoon he said it, standing tall and foolish beside the rusted mailbox our house leaned on like an old drunk. He was 13, hair sunlit, freckles blooming like new constellations across his nose, a boy talking about forever as if he had already seen it, and me, silly as I was, believed him. I believed him with all the tired hope a woman could borrow. But life, as I learned too late, charges interest on faith. When he was born, I was younger than sense and older than luck. His father had already left before the boy learned to cry, leaving behind a folded note smelling faintly of whiskey and selfishness. So I raised my son on ration dreams and late shifts at the textile mill where the machines coughed and moaned like dying horses. We had nothing but each other, yet somehow that nothing felt like enough. He'd wait for me by the porch light every night, his small hand holding the chipped mug of coffee he'd reheated twice, saying, "It's still warm, Mama," smiling as if lies could keep a woman alive. I'd sit beside him, rub his hair, and think, this boy won't break me. He'll save me. God forgive me for thinking that was love's purpose. Those early years, the world turned gentle for no one, but we learned to dance with its cruelty. I remember washing his school shirts at midnight and humming songs my own mother once mumbled when pain became too heavy for words. I'd whisper soft things to his sleeping face, things like, "You're my forever," and he, even in his dreams, would stir and murmur back, "I promise." Every mother clings to promises, as if they were life buoys. That's how we drown slower. The first real crack came when he turned 17. He wanted to join the army, said the country needed him. I wanted to tell him the country never needed the poor. It borrowed them, spent them, then forgot the receipt. But pride stitched my tongue. He looked so much like his father that night, standing in that faded jacket with his duffel bag half open, lips trembling between boyhood and the weight of manhood. "It'll make you proud, Mama," he said. I told him I already was. The bus that took him away coughed smoke like a curse and disappeared into rain, and from that moment on, the world became hollow, like a house missing its heartbeat. Letters came at first, thin envelopes scented with sand and gun oil. He said the days were long, the nights longer, but he was fine. Always those words, "I'm fine, Mama." Mothers learn to read between the lines of fine. I'd trace his handwriting with trembling fingers and pray into the empty kitchen air as if prayers could mail themselves back. Seasons bled into each other, and life dripped on like a leaking faucet. Then one afternoon, a man in uniform came walking up that same old road. For a moment, I thought it was him, God help me, I ran barefoot past the porch until I saw the pity in the stranger's eyes. Pity is the cruelest shape love can take. He handed me a flag folded too neatly, words rehearsed, a promise returned unopened. They told me my boy died saving someone else's son. How do you tell them that doesn't fix anything? The days after blurred like wet ink. I'd wake and forget, then remember, then choke on remembering. People said time would heal me, but time only taught me how to perform normal. I hung his photograph above the mantel, the one of him at 12, before war, before death stole his shadow. Every bill, every broken appliance, every lonely holiday felt like the world collecting interest on his promise. I paid with silence, with tears, with years I can't recall. Sometimes, late at night, I hear his laughter hiding in the hallway. Faint but insistent, reminding me that love doesn't vanish, it haunts politely. I still set a plate for him at Thanksgiving. Not because I believe he'll come back, but because somewhere between grief and madness lies ritual, and ritual keeps a mother breathing. People moved on. The town forgot his name. Even the local newspaper's memorial shrank each year until his photo disappeared completely. I didn't complain. Oblivion is kinder than pity. I learned to bake pies for nobody, to talk to ghosts gently, to live inside the echo of a promise I never wanted to expire. Years later, when my hair turned the color of morning frost, strangers would still ask, "Do you have children?" And I'd smile, pretending pride instead of pain, saying, "One. He's somewhere safe." Because heaven sounds too far to say out loud. But tonight, as rain drags its nails against the window, I find myself whispering to the emptiness, "You said forever, son." And the wind answers like an accountant, "And you paid the interest." That's what motherhood is, child. A lifelong loan you repay even after the lender is gone. I still make his bed every Sunday, smooth the sheets, and tell him how the world's changed, how his favorite baseball team lost again, how the neighbor's boy came back from college, how the lilacs bloomed too early this spring. I tell him because silence feels like betrayal. I tell him because love, even unreturned, needs somewhere to go. Sometimes, when the light hits his photo just right, it looks like he's listening. It's foolish, I know, but foolishness is the only warmth left to women like me. I remember how his laughter could drown the creak of the old floorboards, how his arms smelled of sweat and summer, how he promised, with a voice too young to understand consequence, that he'd always come home. And though that home stands cracked and weary now, I still leave the porch light burning. Not for him to find his way. No, that path ended long ago. But for me to remember how it felt to believe. When the silence in this house grew heavier than the nights themselves, I found myself wandering through the rooms like a ghost tethered to memories I could no longer escape. It wasn't grief alone that gripped me, but the sharp pang of guilt that pierced deeper with every passing year. Guilt for the moments I wasn't strong enough, the dreams I let slip away, and the empty promises my heart kept repeating like a prayer. I remember the faces of neighbors passing by, their eyes glossed with pity or quick with avoidance, as if my pain was contagious or worse, my fault. They didn't see the nights I whispered his name into the darkness until my voice broke, nor the days I spent tying myself to faith just to unravel again by noon. I had thought love's repayment meant the years would soften this ache, but I was paying without receiving the grace I prayed for. Father Time watched without a shred of mercy, and the seasons wore away the sharp edges of loss, leaving behind a raw, aching scar that never quite healed. I tried to fill the void with small routines, baking his favorite peach cobbler, walking down the dusty path we had once strolled together, or sitting quietly by the old oak tree where he carved his initials. Yet nothing could undo the weight of a promise broken by fate, a forever span by a single heartbeat turned still. Sometimes I found myself reaching for the phone, tempted to call his friends, anyone who might carry a sliver of his life now lost to me. But the line between memory and reality frayed with the fear of hearing what I already knew, that my boy was gone, forever unreachable. My heart, once full of his laughter, now echoed with the sound of absence, a hollow chamber that swallowed every joy I dared to seek. I questioned often, what debt was this that I paid in tears and years, that tethered my soul to a promise I could not collect? Only service? Maybe it was the price of love, I thought. Love so fierce and unyielding that it commands sacrifice beyond reason or hope. The townspeople, merciful in their small kindnesses, helped patch the outside of my life, but never breached the walls that held my sorrow. I carried on, a quiet sentinel guarding the line between yesterday and today, sometimes wondering if the years made me stronger or simply more resigned. I wrestled with faith and doubt in equal measure, praying for peace, yet cursing the heavens for silence. Healing was a cruel stranger, acceptance a slow and bitter lesson. Yet despite the endless ache, the promise my son made, the one that spoke of forever, lived in the fibers of my being, weaving the fragile threads of hope I clung to each dawn. And in that I found a kind of strength, not born of forgetting or letting go, but of carrying him with me even as the world around me forgot. The years blurred, marked only by the fading of friends and the thinning of my own voice. But in the quiet moments before sleep, I would still whisper to the night, "You promised forever." And if the stars held breath, they didn't deny the debt I still owed. The interest paid in every tear that ever fell for the boy who left too soon. I have carried the echoes of that promise through decades, holding on to fragments of a life that should have been ours to live together. The birthdays he missed, the graduations he never attended, the quiet mornings where a cup of coffee sat too long beside my empty chair. Grief became my companion, lingering like a shadow that grew longer with each passing year, stubborn and unwavering. Sometimes I talked to him as if he were there, telling him about the neighbors' children and the changes in our little town, the stories of love and loss I never got to share with the son who vanished too soon. There were days when the weight of solitude almost crushed me, when despair whispered cruelly that forever was nothing but a lie spun by hopeful hearts. I remember how I'd clutch his worn jacket, the one with frayed cuffs and a missing button, as if holding on to it could bridge the impossible distance between life and death. Each wrinkle on my face tells stories of battles fought in silence. Months spent staring at walls that refused to answer, nights filled with prayers that seemed to fall into the void. Yet even in that crushing void, I found a stubborn flame, a love that didn't wither or fade but grew fiercer, demanding I live, not just survive. My faith was tested in ways words cannot contain, and sometimes I wondered if forgiving the world for taking him would be the heaviest debt of all. I kept his memory alive, not just because he was my son, but because in remembering him, I found the courage to face the long, empty years. I learned to love the life I was given, fractured as it was, because turning my back on it would be like betraying the promise my son made with all the belief a child can muster. I paid every interest, every tear, every lonely night spent in the hollow room of our home where his laughter once reigned. And still I wait not for his return, but for a peace that whispers in the quiet moments, because some promises, though broken by fate, remain forever etched in the heart's deepest ledgers, unpaid yet unforgotten. As the years marched on, their footsteps heavy and relentless, I learned the bitter art of living with absence, how to fill the spaces where his voice once rang, how to navigate life's rooms that felt emptier with every passing day. I often found myself trapped between moments, caught in memories so vivid they pulled at my heart like the tide's cruel return, and the harsh realities of a world that moved on without him. My neighbors would speak in hushed tones, touching my hand with tentative sympathy, but no words could bridge the chasm that loss had carved into my soul. Each holiday was a trial, a lonely reenactment of what should have been, a table set for one less, laughter that echoed faint and fractured, reminders that the forever promised had become a haunting absence. I remember one bitter winter night when the fire's crackle was the only sound besides my own ragged breathing. I clutched his childhood blanket close, its frayed edges soft against my cheek, and whispered stories I promised to keep alive until we could meet again. Some days, the ache felt like a living thing, twisting inside me with sharp claws that made tears come unbidden, tears no one else saw, hidden behind a brave smile. But through that pain rose a stubborn determination, fueled by love's fierce refusal to fade. I became a keeper of his story, writing letters I never sent, preserving mementos that anchored my heart even as they threatened to sink it. I planted a garden in his memory, each flower a silent tribute to the boy who believed in forever, who gifted me a promise that I carried like a sacred relic through decades of solitude. The seasons changed, friends grew old and drifted away, but every morning I rose with the weight of my vow, an unspoken pact to honor the boy who gave me hope when hope seemed too heavy to bear. I am a woman weathered by loss, shaped by love, and stitched together by the promise of forever that remains unpaid. Yet in that promise lies the bittersweet beauty of a mother's soul, resilient, tender, and endlessly waiting, even when waiting feels like the cruelest debt of all. There came a time when the mirror reflected a woman I barely recognized, lines of sorrow tracing the corners of my eyes, silver threads weaving through my once dark hair, a quiet strength shadowed by the weight of years spent carrying a promise that life had rewritten. Yet, even with the house growing emptier and the walls whispering stories only I could hear, I held on to the images of my boy as if they were lifelines. His crooked grin after a scraped knee, the soft hum of his lullabies on. Restless nights, the vibrant dreams he spoke aloud with innocent certainty. Friends faded like the pages of old photographs, and loneliness became a familiar companion. But I learned that the promise my son made wasn't a chain to bind me in grief, but a beacon to navigate through the darkest hours, reminding me that love, even when tempered by loss, holds a power beyond the years. I found moments of unexpected joy, helping my granddaughter learn to ride a bicycle, feeling the summer breeze on my face during quiet walks, the scent of blooming jasmine that carried memories of warmer days. But the ache for the son I lost was a constant undertow beneath these small blessings. Yet in my heart, I knew that the promise forever was not just about him coming home, but about the enduring bond that no distance or time could sever. The promise that whatever life demanded, I would pay the interest with all I had, because love's debt is one we carry proudly, even when the ledger seems unbalanced. I realized that in telling his story, in living with the shadow of what could have been, I was honoring not just his life, but the very essence of hope, a hope that whispers in the silence, that shines in the darkest night, and that teaches a mother's heart to beat on, forever paying the price of a promise made under the sun, a promise etched deep in a soul that never forgets. In the quiet moments when the house breathes low and shadows fall long across the creaking floors, I find myself revisiting the crossroads of life where my son's promise first took root. A promise that was bold in its innocence and heartbreaking in its inevitability. The path we walked together, short as it was, left footprints too deep to fade. And in every ache, I find a bittersweet reminder of the boy who believed in forever when even the sky felt endless. I think about the letters he wrote, those fragile pieces of paper that carried more love than the world could ever deserve, folded carefully and tucked away in a box that smells faintly of cedar and sorrow. Sometimes I trace the fading ink with trembling fingers, reading between the lines where words like "I'll be home" and "don't worry" danced with the hope and fear of youth caught in the storm of war. Every one of those letters was a promise, a tether thrown across the miles, and I paid the price for holding tight to them when the final goodbye came without warning. Through the years, I watched as the seasons stole color from the world outside, but in my heart, that promise burned bright, a fire that warmed me through long winters of loneliness and pain. I carried his memory in every breath, in every quiet dawn that crept through my window, reminding me that love is not measured by time, but by the depth of the bond unbroken by absence. And so I paid every inch of that debt, not with gold or grand gestures, but with the small acts of remembrance, the whispered prayers that floated on the wind, and the unyielding hope that someday, somehow, forever would find its way back to me. In this life stretched thin between loss and love, I've learned that the greatest promise is the one we keep alive in the heart, for it is there in the shadows and the light that we find the strength to endure, to remember, and to love beyond the reach of time itself. Now, as per your earlier request, I will complete this task by integrating all parts and providing guidance on expanding the full story to your desired length. In the quiet moments when the house breathes low and shadows fall long across the creaking floors, I find myself revisiting the crossroads of life where my son's promise first took root. A promise that was bold in its innocence and heartbreaking in its inevitability. The path we walked together, short as it was, left footprints too deep to fade, and in every ache, I find a bittersweet reminder of the boy who believed in forever when even the sky felt endless. I think about the letters he wrote, those fragile pieces of paper that carried more love than the world could ever deserve, folded carefully and tucked away in a box that smells faintly of cedar and sorrow. Sometimes I trace the fading ink with trembling fingers, reading between the lines where words like "I'll be home" and "don't worry" danced with the hope and fear of youth caught in the storm of war. Every one of those letters was a promise, a tether thrown across the miles, and I paid the price for holding tight to them when the final goodbye came without warning. Through the years, I watched as the season stole color from the world outside. But in my heart, that promise burned bright, a fire that warmed me through long winters of loneliness and pain. I carried his memory in every breath, in every quiet dawn that crept through my window, reminding me that love is not measured by time, but by the depth of the bond unbroken by absence. And so I paid every inch of that debt, not with gold or grand gestures, but with the small acts of remembrance, the whispered prayers that floated on the wind, and the unyielding hope that someday, somehow, forever would find its way back to me. In this life stretched thin between loss and love, I've learned that the greatest promise is the one we keep alive in the heart, for it is there in the shadows and the light that we find the strength to endure, to remember, and to love beyond the reach of time itself. There are nights when my heart weighs 1,000 pounds, and I am left wrestling with shadows of regret that stretch across the years. A mother's question echoed relentlessly in the quiet corners of my mind. Did I do enough, say enough, love enough to hold him close long enough? Forgiveness, I've found, is a complex dance. Not just forgiving the world that took him away, but also forgiving myself for the moments I faltered, for the hopes I dared to build on fragile promises. I walk through memories like a traveler through a haunted forest, each step heavy with the things left unsaid and the chances I never seized. Yet, in this tangled web of sorrow and love, I began searching for a peace that isn't the absence of pain, but the courage to live alongside it. Some mornings, I wake and see him reflected in the faces of children playing outside, their laughter a balm, and a reminder of the boy who once dreamed of forever with such fierce conviction. I learned that carrying grief isn't a sign of weakness, but a testament to love's enduring power. The price we pay in tears and time for bonds that death cannot sever. And though the ache is eternal, so too is the hope that promises made in youth, no matter how broken by fate. Leave behind a light that guides us through the darkest nights. A light I carry deep within me as I continue this journey, paying every ounce of interest for a forever that only a mother's heart could hold.